Okay, we are live.
Good evening, everybody. It's 6 o'clock. I would like to go ahead and get started with this first virtual session with the Bridgeport Public Schools Facility Master Plan and Demographic Studies. Again, welcome. My name is Dr. Avery. I'm the interim school superintendent here in Bridgeport Public Schools. I would like to welcome all the attendees for joining us this evening. We are very excited to receive this information and explore the next steps based on the recommendations and ongoing stakeholder feedback regarding the Facility Master Plan and a Demographic Study. Just to kind of give you a little bit of background information, MP Planning Group and Studio J will be leading this presentation this evening. This is the first of two virtual sessions to provide information about the master plan and demographic study. The second session will be on March the 4th at 6 p.m. And it also will be a virtual session as well. And again, we are really very excited to also be presenting and providing a couple of community engagement sessions. The first session will be March the 31st. And that's going to be held at Harding High School. That will be an in-person opportunity for the community to come out and to ask questions about the demographic study. The second session will be April the 2nd, and that session will be also an in-person session. It will be at Central High School from 6 to 8 p.m. And then the last public opportunity to come out for an in-person session would be April the 3rd at Bassick High School at 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Again, this is a great opportunity for Bridgeport public to come out. Again, ask questions. We're encouraging families and community members to come out and ask the questions that you feel that are needed, that may impact you. Some of the things that we talk about this evening and the next couple of days, how it impacts you and your family and the schools your children attend as well. Again, overall, I'd love to thank you. Engage yourself in the in-depth presentation. Before I get started in bringing my MP Planning Group and Studio Jade in, I do want to emphasize to the community that we have two internal experts that has been instrumental in working with the plan. We have our Chief Operating Officer, George Garcia. He will be assisting any questions regarding the facilities assessment. He will be able to give you the things you need on that facility assessment. And then I have also Chief Information Officer PJ Carafa. PJ will be working with all the questions around the demographic study and questions around that. So they will be on standby throughout the next couple of weeks. So if you have questions internally, those two experts in the district will be assisting in answering those questions. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to MP Planning Group and Studio Jade. We have Mike Zuba, Patrick Gallagher, and then Pam Babuka. And so I hope I got that right, Pam. So I'm going to let you guys give a little bit more detail behind what you do, the company that you serve. And I do want to, extend a huge thank you for engaging me and my staff along this journey. It's been a great experience in learning a little bit more about our facilities and the demographics, issues that we are faced with in Bridgeport Public Schools. And so we're very excited for you to engage our community along this final leg of this journey, and looking forward to your information.
Thank you, Dr. Avery. We're just going to share our screen to get our presentation up. Mike Zuba, I'll be running the first leg of our presentation relay tonight and then passing off to Pat Gallagher. So it's good to be able to be here, be able to talk about where we're at in this process. A master plan it's quite a journey, and we started this work way back in the summer. And I always get that first question of what is a master plan? Why are we doing it? And it really provides a guidance document. It's a roadmap. It's meant to be really a living, breathing document. It provides a framework for the district to be able to guide those key capital investments, help provide efficient operation, make recommendations towards that, end to be able to operate the schools more efficiently, and really to help support the major component of the district is to support those educational vision and mission for the district on what's working, what's not working, what can we do from a facilities and operations standpoint to put the teachers, put the administrators, put the leadership in a better position to be able to guide education towards the students for the next decade and beyond. So tonight we're really talking about that box on the left. We're going to be going through our findings of that discovery phase. We'll present the 10-year enrollment projections. Those are both district-wide and by school. We'll then go over the capacity and utilization, the amount of available seats or lack thereof in some of the buildings. And then finally, we'll touch on the facility condition assessments, which is a very thorough process that's really been undertaken since the summer to be able to get us to where we're at today. And then, at our next meeting and then at our community workshops later on in the springtime, we'll be talking about the master planning. What do those short and long-term options look like? What are those recommendations to help guide the district going forward to support that educational vision? They can be anything from facility realignment and consolidation to different capital investments, new construction, capital renewal, renovations, and be able to really set the stage for those next 10 years and beyond of what the district's going to be able to look like. So to that end of the master plan, going back to Bridgeport, I remember reviewing your master plan well over a decade ago. And it's been since 2008 since it was last updated. The original master plan really sparked your last round of school construction, that major program you undertook that was really penned back in 2003. So with this effort really kicking off, it really starts in 2025 and moves beyond that horizon over the next 10 years to help guide that next round of school construction and realignment of the district. As part of the district's policy, you need to have an updated master plan in order to be able to go ahead with any school construction, any school consolidation, any major changes to the framework of the school district itself needs an updated master plan. This master plan will provide that framework. And really the goal of the master plan from our standpoint is to be able to really identify some of those key challenges, be able to right size your district, looking at your school portfolio, ensure it aligns with the current and future enrollment, ensure that it's meeting those programmatic needs, and basically setting up those facilities themselves in order to be able to provide the best educational environment. And like I mentioned earlier, this is looking at it both in the near term and in that longer term. We really kind of began this process back in the summer. I know MP Planning, myself and Pat, were working with the administrative team, walking through buildings during a heat wave in July. We picked the hottest 2 weeks that we were able to find to be able to get out there and really sweat our way through each and every one of your facilities, looking at all of the spaces, cataloging all those spaces. Pam and her team were going along at that same point in time, summer and through the fall, doing a very exhaustive facility conditions assessment. We were able to wrap up a lot of that body of the work before the end of the calendar year. We've been spending the last couple months really analyzing, getting that information together so it's digestible for not only the community members, the city, the board, and now we're looking to be able to move over the next couple meetings through those findings, through that discovery phase, into that master planning phase, where at our next meeting we're going to be sharing those options, evaluations, sharing those recommendations with you, and finally finalizing the plan and then codifying it in our master plan report towards the end of the spring. As part of any planning process, you really want to have some guiding criteria. The board was able to put together both guiding criteria for the short and near term. I think this is a very good framework to help in our decision-making process as we're weighing some of those different options and as we're looking at the data, what is the board trying to achieve? So I think looking at this, there's a lot of good pieces of information in here, identifying not only what projects need to happen over the next several years, but also identifying the funding strategies, being able to leverage to the greatest extent possible both state, federal dollars, looking at opportunities where necessary to be able to consolidate facilities, looking at operational costs, looking at efficiency across the board. We want to make sure that that impact is not falling solely on one area of a community. That we want to be able to look across the board throughout all of the schools, all of the different neighborhoods. Are there any opportunities there to be able to add what's needed, to be able to consolidate or shrink the portfolio if it's necessary based on the demographics, and then really take a plan and take that information from those facility condition assessments and looking at what is the state of the current buildings, where do we need to be able to improve the condition of the buildings, where to be able to improve the programming within the buildings, where are we going to be able to help add different needs that we haven't been met over the last several years. So really kind of like laying out that framework and realizing that it's going to take a longer term to be able to take on some of those projects. As we all know that in order to be able to even do a renovation of a school, do a new school construction, there's planning, there's design, there's seeking grant reimbursement from the state of Connecticut, and all of that takes time. So really kind of looking at that, laying out the framework, laying out the timeline for all of that. And last but not least, it's being able to share this plan with the community, get input along the way of the process, keeping everybody informed as we work our way through this master planning process. All right, so now this really kind of gets us into that first kind of technical section of our presentation for tonight. And I'm trying to distill down what we looked at for 10-year enrollment projections, and just give a little hint on what that process looks like. So we really break it down into three components. Then enrollment drivers are everything that's influencing enrollment within the city of Bridgeport. We're looking at demographics, we're doing analysis of births, we're looking at the housing market, we're also looking at housing developments. Where are we seeing some new residential construction? What is it likely going to yield from a student standpoint? We're doing a very deep dive in enrollment trends. We're doing that at both the city level as well as the individual neighborhood level, school level, and grade level. Looking at our student immigration and out-migration, getting an understanding of there's other competing interests within any community, looking at those non-public, parochial and private schools, charter schools, other public schools, understanding the resident children that are attending those schools, what do the trends look like, and also doing analysis of student characteristics, looking at language needs, looking at special education, understanding where those students are within the community, and then relating that back to where those programs are offered within the community itself are all key components. And last but not least, we develop different projections. We developed 3 different models. Anything that we've learned over the last 20 years coming out of a housing collapse and going into a pandemic is that you have to have a high, medium, and low model for projections, especially when you're planning school facilities, so that you sort of future-proof the master plan against some of the uncertainties that we have when we're talking about a 5, 10, even longer year window. Those projections are put together both at the district level, the grade level, and then ultimately they're going to inform what that space needs looks like. As Pat will talk a little bit later on about the capacity utilization, we plug these projections into that, and that gives us a good idea of what those space needs are for the foreseeable future in each of the buildings. So getting right into sort of one of the first steps where we roll our sleeves up, and this is just a high-level summary. There's a lot of other information that we produced along the way. I like to be able to take a look back at your historic enrollments, and I think one of the things that we've been seeing over the last year is the increasing enrollment pressures, especially at the comprehensive high schools, where we have a lot more high school students than we've had in the last several years. And I think, we start looking at, is it immigration? Is it this? Is it that? And you really begin to kind of look at this colorized chart, which you're able to track those cohorts from the top left to the lower right. So where you see the green colors and they're kind of moving diagonally across the chart, that just indicates some larger grade cohorts that entered the school system way back in the 2010, 2009, probably about 10, 15 years ago, as larger kindergarten cohorts, and they have now matriculated and moved through our end high school, giving us much larger high school cohorts within our high schools in the city of Bridgeport. And as we sort of kind of move our way down chronologically over time, and we look at our last several kindergarten classes, we notice that those cohorts are much smaller than the cohorts were, say, in the early 2000s, in that 2006, 2010 range. And we start to see those red colors on the chart indicating that those smaller cohorts are now moving through the elementary school system, and we'll start to see them in the next several years showing up within Bridgeport's high schools. So this is a great chart in kind of understanding, as we like to call it, a little bit kind of that wave action that you see in the enrollment trends, where you have some peaks in certain grades, you have some valleys in others, and they all contribute to the various enrollment pressures that we see within buildings themselves. Oop. Oh, bouncing around on me, Pat. This is getting back to how we really kind of get into that fine-grained analysis. So what we're just looking at here is just a very simple dot density map of your elementary and middle school students overlaid on top of the colorized zones. So those attendance zones, those catchment areas where students may reside and their go to a given elementary school. We kind of coined them as our neighborhood schools because they typically encompass several neighborhoods, but it's all geographic based. This gives a good layout and landscape of the city of Bridgeport, from way up to the north when you begin looking up in the upper northwest corner at Winthrop School, Intradistrict, Discovery Magnet, going all the way down to the southeastern corner where we have Dunbar, Tisdale, and each one of those little dots represents a student from Bridgeport Public Schools. And we take all this data and we looked at it over about 5 or 6 years worth of geocoded or address match data. And then on the next slide, we're able to then break the city down into quadrants, which is a much more simpler way of looking at it, where we have our 4 major quadrants of the city. This map is one of many that we've produced. This is just looking at our overall enrollment change, and we did a look pre-pandemic at that 1920 enrollment, and this just happens to be 23-24. I'm looking at that overall pre-K-12 enrollment change over that period of time. It's a little bit of function of the migration and the movement of students, and it's also a little bit of a function of the density of the various areas in the city of Bridgeport. So this is just giving a little flavor for the detail that we've done as part of our analysis. So getting into our district projections overall, noting on that earlier slide how we've looked at that enrollment over the last several years. We've seen, we have some enrollment pressures at the high school, but also we've seen an enrollment decline really over that last 12 to 15 year window. We're projecting over the next 10 years that we're going to see an enrollment decline, albeit it's not going to be at the same level that you've already experienced overall. Based on the October enrollment, we're just about 20,050 students. We're projecting that enrollment in 10 years to go down to just over 19,200 students. An enrollment decline at the elementary and middle schools is going to be about 300 students, shown in the blue color. And then at the high school, it's going to be about 500. But overall, within that, you could see that we still have some of those larger cohorts, especially in the high school, that are moving through. So over the next several years, we're projecting the high school enrollment, shown in that green color, to be upwards of 5,700 students. So it's very similar to the level it is today. And eventually, as those smaller cohorts move up into the high school, that number drops back down to about 5,400 and eventually reaching just below 5,300. And then looking at the elementary, we've already seen that number start to decline a little bit. We're projecting a much lesser decline, especially over the next several years, and an ultimate flattening of the enrollment overall, with enrollment averaging in the elementary and middle school at about 13,900 or so students, and the high school averaging anywhere from 5,500 to 5,600 students. And this is just a look at the individual elementary school projections. This is just showing that 5-year, and we simplify it, especially at the individual school, and we just really look at that first 5 years, because that's really kind of what we're focusing on for our planning. And I won't blind everybody with all the numbers, but we've done the same activity with colorizing those schools that are seeing some growth, those schools that are seeing some modest decline, and those schools that are seeing some greater decline overall. And we've used this information to be able to plug that into our capacity utilization and getting an understanding of what those space needs look like today, and then what those space needs are going to look like over that next 5-year window.
Thanks, Mike. Good evening, everybody. My name is Pat Gallagher with MP Planning Group, and kind of the next logical step in the process is to look at your facilities and see how well they are, sized to accommodate your current and your future enrollment. And we always like to, when we're doing these exercises, remind folks that capacity is dynamic. It's always changing as the way you educate your students changes. And so facilities that were designed 50 years ago for 500 students may not be able to educate 500 students today because we're providing so many more support services and special education services for those students. And so capacity is always changing and evolving as those educational needs change. Really, the key to our capacity study is full-size classrooms. So these are the rooms that could house grade level instruction in your elementary schools, as well as your core subjects and your specials in the high schools. And as we're developing the capacities for each of the buildings, we also want to make sure that there is adequate space within each building to provide the range of special education support and administrative services that your buildings need. And what we've seen in Bridgeport and what we've seen in a lot of our client districts in Connecticut is we've seen growing needs, especially around special education and English language learners. And as those programs grow, they need space. And as those programs grow, that takes away some capacity that maybe historically could have been used for pre-K-12 grade level instruction. It's also important to note how we developed our capacity in terms of loading levels. So whenever we develop our capacities, we never use your maximum number of students that you can fit per your teacher contract, because we know that in neighborhood-based school systems, that's just not achievable because you never have evenly distributed students across all grade groupings. So for the purposes of our capacity study, for the neighborhood schools, we used 24 students per classroom, which is well below the average of the contract maximums for grades K through 8, and then 23 at most of the magnet schools, with the exception of Discovery Magnet, which has a special loading level due to its unique program. And so again, we're trying to look at capacity through kind of an efficient operational lens, not a hypothetical maximum that could fit within the buildings. So as Mike alluded to, we undertook kind of a multi-step process where we got into each of the buildings, marked up floor plans, walked the spaces to try to understand what they were being used for, identify current grade level classrooms, and those classrooms that are used for your self-contained programs, which we know have lower loading levels. I believe we use 12 students per classroom for the AIM, RISE, and SOAR classrooms, as opposed to 24, and pre-K classrooms as well, which had a lower loading level. We also identified what we call flex classrooms. So these are classrooms that aren't currently used for grade level instruction, but could be used for grade level instruction. So Mike had noted we've seen about an 1,800 student decrease in pre-K-8 enrollment over the last decade or so. And so we have fewer K-8 instructional rooms than we had a decade ago. But those rooms are still available and could be used for instruction. And so those were identified in the schools that had them, and those were incorporated into the capacity for those buildings. And so that leads us to our overall planning capacity, which again is not the maximum hypothetical number of students, but kind of that operational target. Our overall planning capacity for the elementary schools is just under 18,000 seats, compared to an enrollment of about 14,200 as of this fall, and an overall utilization of about 80%. So that if we compare those two numbers, it leads to an overall seat surplus of about 3,600 seats. No district can ever operate at that 100% efficiency. And so it is not realistic to expect that any district can operate, at 100%, because you're always going to need to have some flexibility, especially in a neighborhood school system where, the geography also plays an important component in how you size your buildings. So we look ahead and see both how well positioned are your buildings to respond to enrollment today, and then how well are they positioned in the future. And we simplified this by making kind of color-coded categories, looking at utilization by school, comparing enrollment to that planning capacity. And while that overall capacity or utilization is about 80%, that trend really varies by building. So we have several buildings that are over 90% utilization, including Blackham, which is operating slightly over that ideal planning target. We have several magnet schools as well that are very efficiently used in that 90 to 100% category. Our second tier is our moderately well-utilized schools. So these are schools that are between 80 and 90% utilized, where the space that's available is largely headroom in existing classrooms. So these are not buildings where we have rooms that could be repurposed. You may just have class sizes that are slightly below the district average. Our third tier is our underutilized buildings. So these are buildings that are between 70 and 80% utilized. And these are buildings where we do start to see some of those flex classrooms. So rooms that have been used for grade level instruction in the past, but are no longer needed due to the enrollment of the building. And then our last category, our very underutilized category, are schools that are below 70% utilized. And there's kind of a broad range in this category where we have several buildings below 60%, and other buildings that are kind of approaching that 70% mark. And so these are buildings where there is both headroom within classrooms as well as a lot of flex classrooms that are available for grade level instruction. Looking ahead over the next 5 years, we're anticipating a slight decrease in enrollment, and therefore the utilization of the buildings is anticipated to change as well. We're expecting one school to shift from the well-utilized to the moderately well-utilized category, but we're still expecting quite a number of schools to be operating in that 90 to 100% range, with Blackham and Reed being the highest two utilized buildings, as well as the magnet schools. And then we're also anticipating a growth in the number of schools in that very underutilized category. So 3 additional schools averaging below 70% utilization over the next decade. We undertook a similar process for the high schools where we first developed enrollment projections, and the high school is a little bit unique in that we do have the magnet programs at Fairchild Wheeler comprising a not insubstantial share of your overall seats and enrollment at the high school level. It's important to note that these projections are really being done under the status quo. We know that the magnet programs at Fairchild Wheeler have been under-enrolled due to the need to maintain a certain percentage of suburban students. And as the number of suburban students decreases, that decreases seats available for Bridgeport resident students. So our projected enrollment for Fairchild Wheeler is assuming that those recent trends continue. But we do know as we move into that master planning phase, that may be an opportunity through policy programs to try to encourage additional enrollment in that building, and therefore taking some of that pressure off of the 3 city high schools. So overall, as Mike noted, we are anticipating largely stable enrollment over the next 4 years, but then declining enrollment over the later years of the projections as some of those smaller classes that are currently in your elementary schools start moving up. And then reaching about 5,500 students at the midpoint of our projections, and then decreasing to under 5,300 students in year 10. We did a similar process for developing the capacities for the high schools, where we did an inventory of full-size classrooms. And knowing that the high schools are a little bit different in how they operate, with the schedule driving a lot of the capacity, we applied a scheduling factor. So in addition to using loading levels, we applied a 75% scheduling factor, knowing that every classroom in the high school is not scheduled every period of the day. That is incorporated into how these high schools are designed, is having that flexibility, having that at least one planning period where the teacher can stay in their room. We also note that we have our existing BASIC capacity here because it is based on this current year's enrollment, but we know that's a facility that will be coming online with the new BASIC. And so that is in our look ahead. But if we look at our other buildings, we have Central operating at about 96% of the capacity this year, Harding operating above that capacity, Fairchild Wheeler being underutilized largely due to the suburban enrollment being below the threshold, and therefore decreasing opportunities for Bridgeport resident students. And then BMA currently being temporarily housed at the South End facility, which will eventually move into the new BASIC. So our look ahead highlights some of those changes that will occur when the new BASIC opens for the 25-26 school year. So we are replacing the capacity of the old BASIC with the capacity of the new BASIC, design capacity being 1,250 students. And that's inclusive of both the students in the BASIC attendance zone as well as the programs at BMA. And so the number being shown for the projected enrollment at BASIC is inclusive of both of those programs. And due to some of those enrollment pressures that we've seen at the high school over the last few years, we're anticipating BASIC to open operating slightly above that 1,250 design capacity and remaining slightly above that for the next 10 years. Central, we're anticipating to be well utilized at between 90 and 100% of its planning capacity. Harding, the building that currently has the greatest enrollment pressures, we're anticipating that to continue for the next few years, and for that to decline to about 100% of the planning capacity under the status quo. And again, that's largely due to the inefficiencies at Fairchild Wheeler, and again, driven by the suburban student enrollment trends. Overall, if we look at the total capacity and the total enrollment, we're actually well below that 100% threshold. But the inability to use a lot of the capacity at Fairchild Wheeler is forcing more Bridgeport resident students into the 3 other high schools and contributing to those enrollment pressures. So again, as we kind of move into that next phase of work, looking at looking ahead, one of the key things is going to be how can we maximize enrollment at Fairchild Wheeler and therefore relieve some of those enrollment pressures at the 3 other high schools, and really maximize our existing building footprint without having to build any new space. Now I'll pass to Pam to then talk about our next component.
Good evening. Thank you, Pat. Again, my name is Pam Babuka. I'm with Studio Jade. We're an architectural engineering and design firm that not only designs and does complex renovations, but we also have a group that specializes in facility condition assessments and capital planning. It has been a pleasure working with your leadership team. And honestly, I want to extend a thank you now to all of the members of the facilities team who made it possible for their staff to be available and provide some really insightful information that makes this assessment very valuable. So it's not something that we always receive, but when we do, it makes a significant difference in the outcome of the data. Our scope of work was to identify a 10-year forecast of capital renewal and improvement needs that look at what the repairs or restoration or potentially replacement of equipment would have to happen again over the next 10-year period of time. So we had a team of an architect, a mechanical engineer, and electrical engineer that went through and looked at the building as a whole. And ultimately, their focus was looking at the existing space conditions. All right. So regardless of whatever discipline or systemics there were, they were looking at the building as a whole collectively. And as part of that, they were also looking for accessibility concerns. Again, we are looking at the building as it exists now, but if the building was to go through a major renovation, what are some things that would be required to be done in order for that renovation, that comprehensive renovation, to be executed? It's the most notable difference is, however, is that, like as Mike and Pat were just describing, we are looking at the building and the spaces as they are currently designed and used. We don't take into consideration any costs associating to repurposing or anything that's program driven, right? So it's a good current state understanding. Our total scope was 37 buildings. It was just over 3.5 million square feet. And as part of the process, before we even stepped out into the field, we reviewed what standards are. So we're all looking at everything from the same perspective and reviewed that with the team, confirmed what the process was to make sure we were meeting everybody's protocols and requirements. Our scope also included developing cost estimates. So line by line cost estimates where we followed a cost model approach that was reviewed and approved by the team, and ultimately to deliver an analysis, which we're having the opportunity to present to you today, on what our findings were. So this slide is providing you a summary of all the data that we collected district-wide, okay? In the upper left-hand corner, it lists out in that table the 10-year forecast by priority. So every corrective action that we applied, we identified what was that sense of urgency, what was the timeline, and we associate that to a priority. So there were 4 priorities. Immediate, which for all intents and purposes was in the next calendar year, whereas high priority is 1 to 3 years, medium is 4 to 5 years, and a low priority was 6 to 10. In a master planning environment, we're always trying to make sure we understand what that order is, to make sure that the team, as they're planning and moving forward, understands what's that 5-year breakout and what's below that, what's forecasted past that. Big picture, the total dollars, as you can see, was just over $702.5 million. Again, that's for all schools across 10 years. What you will notice is that 56% of that is in the first 3 years, and 84% of the total need is in 5 years. So what that tells me is that you have some infrastructure and equipment that really is looking to have an investment made to maintain the current state, right? Without making any program changes, there's an investment into the infrastructure and the systemic needs of those buildings. When we break down what were the types of corrective actions that were applied, on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see a 10-year forecast by system. So we looked at all of the different items that were identified, and building envelope, just to give you a brief description of that, is like the outside parameters. So it's building walls, doors, windows, and the roof, for all intents and purposes, okay? So it's the wrapping around the building, the structure itself. Electrical, self-explanatory. Interior architecture relates predominantly to interior finishes and construction. So floors, ceilings, walls, railings, handrails on the inside. It could also be things like casework and things of that nature. So anything related to the interior finishes is all under interior architecture. Mechanical and plumbing systems are self-explanatory. Site improvements could be things that are related to sidewalks, potentially driveways. Could also be things that are related to handrails and access into the building itself to make sure it's accessible. And then space adaptations are places where, in a lot of cases, if we found bathrooms that may not have been compliant as far as for what current standards are for ADA, those would be allowances associated to making those improvements. We also, within this, and depending on what system it was associated to, if there were dollars for abatement for materials from during the time that the buildings were constructed, we have included allowances for the abatement costs, and then they are plugged in within each one of these systems as well. Collectively, when you look at that overall, go back one real quick, that the chart in the center pie chart, that's showing us that 30% of the costs are associated to interior architecture and 27% are related to mechanical. So those are the highest categories, the yellow, the gold, and the gray, of where collectively across all buildings, all of the costs are building up, okay? So we have broken it down by building, but this is showing you the needs as it is across the district. Okay. Next slide. With that same data, and just to give you a deep dive on what it looks like at a building by building level, this is what we refer to as a tier 1 report. So the buildings are listed in alphabetical order down the left-hand side. And then what we did was we looked at what was the percentage. We listed and broke out the corrective actions by priority. So you can see them in the yellow shaded columns. And then we provided what that percentage of the total corrective actions for that school represent. When you look at what those numbers are collectively, you can see the ones that are highlighted represent the top 15% of all schools, right? So Bassick High ended up having 3 categories, priority 1s, 2s, and 3s, where they had hit the highest percentages. So they rang into the top 15% for all of them. So it's not surprising that it didn't inform, because all the dollars were pushed up in the first 3 categories. But this just helps you get an understanding of the spread of the dollars. And because of the number of schools, it actually goes to 2 pages. So the next slide breaks down the remaining of the schools. And again, in this case, the tier 1 are shown in alphabetical order. So that's that priorities. On the next slide, we looked at the systems, okay? Now these are sorted differently. School names are listed down the left, but if you go all the way over to the far right side, you will see that the last column shows total billing only cost per gross square foot. So in order to really evaluate the dollars that are required to improve a particular building, we normalize it by comparing the total cost to the gross square footage of the physical structure. We eliminate the dollars in this case associated to doing site improvements, because that could really skew what those dollars look like, and we want to look at it associated to the building itself. But then ultimately we sorted it based off of who had the most to the least. So the schools in the very top, Beardsley Hall, St. Michael's, Park City, Magnet, and Edison, they had the top 15% based off of most capital dollars needed to make improvements. This is very valuable for the master planning process, and it does inform option development, because it helps you understand the greatest needs, where those needs are, but also on the inside of that, not just looking at the order on the right side, but the pink cells share the same story. So if we look at Hall, for example, the second line, it's top 15% north to south. So of all schools for building envelope, it had the top 15%. It also showed top 15% of costs needed for fire alarm protection, interior architecture, and mechanical. So now you're starting to see an understanding, not just based off priority, but now here where the investments required. So these 2 tables are great tools. And the next slide will show the remaining schools. You can see that those numbers were up in the $450, and the bottom bracket of schools really are $100 per square foot and less. So you can see many of those are all of your high schools, which you have recently invested in, right? So this really splits it out and creates a chart that helps inform what the current state of your schools are. Next slide. Okay, there you go.
Thanks, Pam. So I will wrap us up. And, one of the things we wanted to talk about tonight is, well, how can we kind of slice and dice the data where we're looking at our demographic and capacity study data alongside the FCA data. And this is going to inform some of the recommendations that we're going to share with you all next week. So, one of the exercises we wanted to do was that ranking exercise, and this just takes Pam's data that she showed previously for the elementary schools and color codes it and really develop some categories into the schools that have the lowest need, moderate need schools, and the highest need. And what you can see, not surprisingly, is the schools that were built as part of the city's last school construction push back in the early to mid 2000s through the 20-teens have relatively low needs relative to the square footage of the building. And so the strategy there going forward is largely going to be kind of maintaining state of good repair for those facilities. As we get into our moderate category, these are schools that have maybe had some recent additions, but not that comprehensive update like the newer buildings. And then as we start to get into that top tier on a cost per square foot basis, we have some of are older facilities or facilities who have not undergone a substantial renovation. And again, this is going to help inform kind of our recommendations and our next steps of especially how do we address a lot of these schools here in this highest need category. We also noted on the right-hand side here, the capital needs relative to the enrollment, knowing that you have, some buildings that are underutilized, which kind of contributes to, if you have a building that has a high need and is underutilized, if we kind of normalize that dollar amount to the student population, it shows quite a greater range than just looking at it on a per square foot basis. There are a lot of the same facilities in the top 10, but there is quite a differentiation among the top here. You can see Hall, Beardsley, and Edison are among the top 3 per student. They're also among the top 4 per square foot. Park City Magnet, a school that's very well utilized, a very sought after magnet program, falls down a little bit when we normalize it by student population, just simply because the building has more students in it relative to its capacity. Another thing to note, and I don't know, Pam, if you mentioned it, but I'll reiterate it if you did, is that all of these values are in unescalated 2024 Q4 dollars. So escalation has not been applied to any of these numbers. So undoubtedly, as you undertake these improvements over a 10-year period, escalation will factor into, the ultimate cost of those repairs and investments in the facilities. And then this chart here just compares our overall facility utilization with the capital needs. So we took those 3 colors from the FCA chart, the highest needs, moderate needs, and lowest needs, and compared that to the utilization analysis that we put together as part of our demographic study. And as you can see, we have several schools that are, well utilized, but they have a lot of needs. So these are buildings like Blackham or Reed or Park City Magnet, where we do have a high capital need, but they're also a tremendously popular and serve a large number of students. We also have buildings with high needs that have lower utilization. So we have Beardsley, Bryant, Edison, Hall, Hallen, Hooker, and our classical studies Maplewood, which barely is in this category. It kind of teeters the line between the two. And so, again, facilities that are in need of investment, and it's going to inform our strategies around next steps. On the other end, we have several facilities that have relatively low needs and are well utilized. And again, these are some of our buildings that have undergone new construction or substantial renovation over the last 20 years. And then we also have some schools that have low needs but are underutilized. So one of the things we're going to look at is, is there opportunity to shift more Bridgeport Public School students into these facilities, which are of a high quality and are, really aligned well with those modern educational needs. And then we have in our moderate category also several buildings in that $200 to $300 per square foot. And again, ranging from the magnet programs, which are very well utilized, to some of our neighborhood schools that are in the lower category. So we just wanted to summarize some of the key takeaways from this stage of our work. And we'll start with the elementary schools. As Mike had noted, our elementary enrollment has decreased by about 1,800 students over the last decade. That's pre-K through 8. And we're projecting a much more modest decrease over the next decade. And as births have decreased and stabilized, that's eventual stabilization will work its way into your kindergarten classes and then eventually into your upper elementary grades as well. We have 7 elementary schools in the underutilized or very underutilized categories. Many of these are your neighborhood schools, with your magnet schools generally being better utilized than your neighborhood school buildings. We only have 7 elementary schools in that well utilized category, so that's over 90% utilization, including several of the magnet schools, as well as I believe Reed and Blackham, the 2 neighborhood schools that are very well utilized. And really, having walked through all of the elementary facilities, there really is quite a range of age, condition, vintage, and ability for the buildings to support your current education, and especially the buildings of older vintage that haven't undergone major improvements. In some cases, for over a century, they really have physical limitations and layouts that reflect when they were built and don't really align well with modern educational best practices. As Pam alluded to, we have significant capital renewal and capital improvement needs. Many of those needs are over the next 5 years. And so as part of our presentation next week, we will be presenting some recommended strategies on how to address those in a strategic manner. And it'll be, a range of strategies that'll include capital renewal, new construction, and consolidation of facilities to really address this in a holistic manner. And then the high schools are a little bit of a different story. We have the 3 comprehensive city high schools that are very well utilized and ideally would have less enrollment pressures should we be able to maximize that space at Fairchild Wheeler. And so again, under that status quo, we're projecting Fairchild Wheeler to remain underutilized due to the state mandated suburban student enrollment percentages. And for every 1 suburban student seat that is unfilled, that's 3 seats for Bridgeport resident students that are not available to them. So certainly, looking at ways to maximize enrollment in that facility is a win-win in that it helps efficiently use that building as well as help alleviate some of those pressures at the other 3. We are expecting those enrollment pressures to continue over the next few years, but over the later years of our projections, as some of those smaller classes currently in your lower elementary grades begin to move up, we are expecting some decrease in enrollment at the high school level of about 500 students. And one of the challenges is with the opening of the new BASIC, all of your high schools were really right-sized to the projected enrollment, leaving Fairchild Wheeler as really the only facility where you have a little bit of buffer. And so when that facility opens and BMA consolidates into it, we are going to be losing capacity and seats at the high school level. The new BASIC will also be opening close to that design capacity. Another key finding is the high schools are in really good condition. These are all facilities that you've made major investments in over the last 20 years. And if we look at it on a by square foot basis, are among the least needy buildings. And so the focus is largely going to be kind of maintaining that state of good repair that you have, maintaining that real quality of those buildings for the next 10 years and beyond. And old BASIC was really the exception to the rule, and we assessed it largely to help inform the discussions around facility reuse. Are there opportunities to perhaps reuse that space for other needs? And that facility came in with about $81 million worth of capital renewal and capital improvement needs. And so one of the terms we like to use is cost avoidance. So by building new, you are not having to invest that $81 million in capital renewal and capital improvements. And again, we think that that's going to be a key part of that master plan is how do we leverage new construction to maximize our reimbursement and save us from some of that deferred maintenance cost and really capture that cost avoidance that we would have had to spend anyway. And so our next steps, we will be presenting our recommended long-term plan on March 4th. And then we have the 3 community informational meetings, which Dr. Avery spoke about in the beginning, scheduled for late March and early April. We're happy to assist the BPS team with answering any technical questions that may come up around any of our work. The leadership team has really been great at providing us with all of the information that we need and making sure that we're a priority in terms of getting what we need to do our work. So we're here to support them if you have any questions related to any of our components and make sure that you can get the answers you need. And we look forward to continuing to work with you all in the community and present our findings next week.
Thank you, guys. Mike, Patrick and Pam, we thank you very much for engagement. Thank you for the information this evening. Again, we look forward to next week and the upcoming weeks that we're going to be engaging the community even more. And so, again, very comprehensive, presentation tonight. So again, thank you very much for that. And for Bridgeport community, again, this is just a great opportunity for the community to kind of wrap around the data. It's a lot. I do understand, first out of the chute, I get it. So please, work through it. There's gonna be a lot of conversation around it over the next couple of weeks. And so ask your questions, be engaged, come out to the community forums, and we appreciate your time and engaging with us this evening. So again, thank you and have a great evening.
Thank you.